That's over here. Today we are making a cherry pie with fresh cherries from our orchard, which is pretty exciting. First thing I'm going to do is make a pie crust, which is fairly simple. If you've been following along here, our orchard trees are still fairly young, so they are not extremely productive yet. But our cherry harvest has been increasing. We have 2 Evans Bali cherry trees, which is a variety of kind of semi-sweet tart pie cherries. And they grow in our climate, and I know that they do because I have several different friends in the area who have some that are, decades old, and they've survived here in the long run. Anyway, the first year that we got some cherries off of them, I think we got 3 cherries. And the next year we got 5, so we almost doubled our harvest. And the following one, last year we got 100 cherries, which was, of course, a lot more than 5. And this year we got almost 10 pounds of cherries. Now, we've already eaten a lot, I canned a few, and we did have other cherry pies. These were the last few to ripen, so we are done with the cherries for this year, but that's exciting to see some progress. So for this pie crust, fairly simple recipe. It's 1.25 cups of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/3 cup of butter, and then just enough water to moisten it. Now, if you've ever made a pie crust before, and I'm not an expert on making this perfectly, but you want things cold. Like this butter was in the freezer not very long ago, so it's pretty cold. This helps with the pie crust texture. So I have to break it up. It's really cold. Break it up just a little, and I usually manage to make pie crust without doing that. The flavor doesn't change a whole lot, but if you have your butter cold and your water cold, I have some water in the freezer. It's not frozen solid, but just to chill it down, you get a improved texture. So it's fine enough to use. I'm going to use my pastry blender here and try to make little flaky cold butter pieces in my flour. Anyway, the actual pie recipe that I'm using is one from my great Aunt Catherine, who's approaching 90 years old, and like many women in my family, is an excellent cook and baker and other things. I think she said she won an award for this cherry pie recipe. And where I grew up, most of the women can cook and bake, so it was not a place where everyone got a ribbon kind of thing. Anyway, she's a very, very skilled cook and baker. And this is her cherry pie recipe, which I have also done. Apologies to her if that wasn't her intention with other fruits. I've used the same recipe with peaches and so on. But it is a very good crumb-topped pie recipe. So now that my butter's kind of flaked up into little chunks in here with my salt and flour, and while I usually use whole wheat flour, usually from our fresh ground wheat for everything, I have tried multiple whole wheat pie crusts, and I cannot get a texture that is a pie crust-like texture. You get more of a cracker, which I like for some things, just not so much for a pie. So I am using white flour for my pie crust because it's just, nothing else does give you the same texture for that. So pie crust is pretty simple. That's salt, flour, and butter. And now we need just enough cold water to moisten it. So like I said, I put this a few minutes ago in the freezer to actually get the water pretty chilled. And I'm doing this more by eye than by measurement for the texture I want. I think the recipe says 3 to 4 tablespoons of cold water, but I'm pouring just a little bit, mixing it just enough to see how much flour that moistens, and so on, until I can just barely get it to stick together. That's the texture you're wanting. I haven't personally done this, but I know some people actually use vodka to moisten it. The alcohol all evaporates in the process of baking a pie crust, but I've heard that can help give you a superior texture because it does evaporate so fast and doesn't make it sticky and tough and chewy. But I just have never played around with that. But I know that's an option. You could do the same recipe and I think use a couple tablespoons of vodka instead of the water to stick it together. So you can kind of see the texture here, how my flakes are just, and I don't want to overwork this. I'm just trying to moisten all the flour bits enough to stick together, and that's really close. Just give it a few more drops there. A little dry corner. Then we're going to roll this out, make a crust, stick it in here, and bake it while we pit our cherries so that is ready to go, which probably means I need to turn my oven on. Make sure the racks are where I want them. Okay, let's see if this will hold together enough to form a ball and roll out. This beautiful wood rolling pin was a gift from some friends many years ago. And I use it every time that I am making a pie. Probably doesn't make the pie better by being pretty, but it makes me happy to see all the pretty inlaid wood somebody took the time to do in making a rolling pin. I might need one more drop of water. I can't quite get that to make a ball. You want to be able to kind of form it into a round-ish shape to start rolling. And you can chill this pie dough down again before rolling it out as well. I haven't usually taken the time to do that because I'm making something and I'm just making it now. But you could wrap that up in saran wrap or something and put it back in the fridge to fully chill more before rolling it. And I am not any expert fine pastry baker. I don't do a lot of baking the more fine and fancy things, but I can make one that at least tastes good and people seem to enjoy eating. I know when rolling, you kind of want to start at the center of your dough every time and go out in every different direction. If you just start at one edge and go clear across it like this the whole time, you will end up with usually a very thin edge on the front and thicker on the back end of that roll. So if you start in the center and roll out, you get something more even thickness. And this is not a perfectly round shape, but that's okay as long as it looks like it's big enough to cover my pie plate. What I do usually grease my pie plate here. You can use just the butter wrapper often if you've used a whole stick of butter, but sure we can get our pie slices out of the pie plate. And this is kind of an oversized one. I think this recipe is for a regular sized pie plate, but like yes, that's an 8 or a 9 inch, and this one's like an inch bigger. I like it because it makes it a little less prone to simmering fruit juice over onto the bottom of the oven. I'm just going to set that in there, let it sit down, and I didn't get it quite big enough because you can see I've got a gap here, but that's all right because we're just going to patch it from somewhere we have some extra dough. There's probably more professional ways to make sure your pie crust is perfectly even, but that works for me. Now, I don't like a real burnt edge on my crust, so I'm going to cut off plenty of this extra little overlaps here. You can take these little scraps and sprinkle a little sugar and cinnamon on them and bake them, and they make wonderful little cookies as well. But Just gonna take off that excess so it's not too thick. And then the way I've always finished a crust is just taking these two fingers and making like a triangle and pointing the other finger into them. It makes a little pinched edge as I go around the crust. And I don't know why everyone always does pie crust like that. I don't know if it helps hold the edge or keep it from burning, but that's just how I've always done it and how you usually see pie crust shaped. And we're going to pop this in the oven. Going to remember to prick the bottom of it because otherwise it will bubble all over and you won't come out with a flat pie crust at all. And I never have used pie crust weights or anything, but that probably would also help. But I'm just going to give it a good many holes. You won't be able to see these little fork holes when it comes out, but that will keep it from ballooning in the center. So there's what the crust looks like going in the oven. That oven heats pretty quickly. And we're going to bake that for about 10 minutes. So while that is baking, we can clean this flour up, which I can actually put back in here because we're going to make a crumb topping, so that extra flour can just go into that. But in the meantime, I need to get my pie filling here. And so for that, we have cherries. But cherries, if you've ever eaten fresh cherries, have seeds in them. And a pie is not that much fun to eat full of seeds. There are hand methods of pitting cherries. They're all fairly time consuming. This little handy gadget, which you just have to have a flat corner of a counter or table or something to attach to, makes pitting them very easy. And the volume for a single pie wouldn't be a huge deal, but like when I was growing up, we would actually use a second pie plate because the way this attaches to my counter, I can't get anything big under there. We would do hundreds of pounds of cherries through here, and if you were trying to hand pit hundreds of pounds of cherries, that would be a big deal. So you drop the cherries. If there's a stem or something, pull that off into here. And these are little because pie cherries tend to be small. But you punch through there, and it punches a hole with this plunger, pushes the seed out into here, and then mostly picks the cherry up and, right as I say that, flings it through. It punches a little easier and better with bigger cherries, but it does run these pie cherries through as well. So I'll give you a close-up here of how that works. A few of these pitted themselves when I picked them off the tree a few days ago. But you do kind of have to keep an eye on it because every now and then you'll see one that pops through with the seed punched, like I saw it do it there, but not taken clean out. So when you get going, and I'm doing this backwards for my hands because of where the camera is, you can pit a whole lot of cherries pretty quickly. There, I saw that one miss. You get almost no misses with a bigger cherry, but with these smaller ones you do have to keep your eye on that a little bit. But these are all coming out all pitted and ready for our pie. So I'm just going to run the rest of these through, and then we will add the ingredients we need to make them into our pie filling. Okay, by the time we got our cherries pitted, the timer just rang for this pie crust. It's still got a little bit of a bubble in the middle. Let that go for just another minute. That's almost done. So our cherries here, to make our pie filling, I need a little pot. Now Aunt Catherine's recipe here, which I'll just show you. Like most recipes, I'm not following exactly. It calls for a cup and a half of cherries. This is more than a cup and a half of cherries, but with all my fruits stuff, you know, cobblers, pies, crisps, etc., I tend to like it heavy on the fruit. So I don't mind going a little more than that. So I'm just going to use all the cherries that we have, which, if I was guessing, is more like 2.5 cups, but that's going to be fine. So we've got our cherries in here, and we are going to add, you can add either juice or water. Got a cup and a half, that's a half. If I had some cherry juice, I would certainly use that. I'm just going to add water, and we're going to get this simmering on the stove over here. Just get that hot through, and then we need to thicken it. So we're going to add that stuff in a minute. Pull the pie crust out here. Show you what it looks like. It has collapsed slightly down into the pan from the edges. The you know, it's not clear out to the glass edge, but I'm fine with that because if you have it clear out over on a big pan like that, it tends to butter more when we bake our pie here in a minute. Okay, so we've got our cherries and our water, and we're adding a little sugar. The recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup. I usually do just a little less than that because I don't mind our pie being kind of sweet tart, so I'm going to do more like 1/2 cup. And I could use honey here as well. And then clear gel, Sure gel, something like that. There's cooking types and not cooking types. You could use another thickener, I think probably like cornstarch. Arrowroot doesn't always set perfectly well for a pie when it cools, but you can use that. But anyway, this is what's going to make it thick and not just juicy liquid. And this is just basically pectin made from apples. There are ways to make your own pectin. Before I dump that in there, this is important, it'll get all clumpy. So I need another 1/4 cup of water here. And I'm going to mix it into that before dumping it into my hot cherry liquid so that white stuff doesn't get all lumpy. So it doesn't take much mixing, but just do that with a fork till I don't see any little lumpies there. Now I'm going to pour it in here as well. And we're just getting that hot through. Right now it just looks like water with cherries in it. So we're going to get that up to a boil, then we're going to pour it in our pie shell. So in the meantime, we're going to, while that's warming up, we're going to make our crumb topping, which again takes a little bit of flour. I'll do another cup of flour. And I have found, I did try this recipe once, not doing a crumb topping, but doing like a crust on top. There is too much liquid juice in this recipe that if the crumb topping doesn't soak up part of it, it will come out very juicy and liquidy and not like a pie slice you can make. Still tastes delicious, but it won't come out in the kind of thing you can slice into a pie shape if you don't have the crumbs on top. They are an important part of actually soaking up some of the liquid and making it set. So I've got a cup of flour, 1/2 cup of brown sugar. This is a 1/4 cup measuring cup, so I'm doing 2 of those. Just have to grab my half cup one. And mix those two together a little bit. Brown sugar gets a little dry here pretty easily because it's so, our climate's so dry, and even sealed up in a bag, it starts to dry out. And then we want a 1/4 cup of butter. And this can be soft butter. I was using frozen butter for the crust, but this we want to be soft. So I'm actually going to just, it's already like room temperature. I'm probably going to just stick it in that oven that's still warm for just a minute and just let it kind of melt into here, because we're going to make this a soggy crumb texture, not a pie crust texture. So we're bringing this up to a boil. Like I said, it looks just like cherries and water. And once it is actually simmering, we're going to pour it into our pie shell there. But you can see right now it looks really watery. This will thicken by the time the pie comes out of the oven. But we're going to get it hot through here. So you can see here as this is getting hot how it is kind of getting foamy on the surface. It's just about to come to a boil. And we're going to pour it into our pie crust. Pull this out of there. That has definitely softened our butter. And now we're just going to, mix the butter into the flour and sugar until it's kind of a moist, crummy texture. This is starting to simmer. Turn that off. Now we're just going to throw the whole thing together, these 3 pieces, the crust, the filling, and the topping, and pop it in the oven. So this is quite easy. You don't have to get every little bit of dry flour, mixed with the butter here, because the juice in that is going to soak up part of it. I guess I'll move this out of the way. If you ever are going to pit more than a handful of cherries, I recommend these. I'll try to remember to link to one down below. They're not that expensive. I've had this one for a while, and my parents' one had, like I said, many hundreds and hundreds of pounds of cherries run through it over years. This slides out so you can empty your pits, and the only part you have to replace over time is this little rubber gasket, because that will wear out and then the whole cherry will fall through. But anyway, very efficient if you have a lot of cherries to pit, and it's a pretty simple little contraption. Got our foamy hot cherry pie filling we're going to pour in here. See how it still looks very juicy. And if you don't use a spatula to clean it out right away, anything that is left in your pan will set almost instantly as it cools. And then we're going to put our crumb topping. You can kind of see the texture that is there, just slightly moist and a little bit dry. We're going to just sprinkle that on top of this. And in my experience, if you go around and sprinkle anything like this on the edges first, then you'll end up with plenty in the middle. But if you do the middle first, you end up with nothing on the edges. Kind of spread that out. Yeah, this is ready to go in the oven. So we're baking this for about 25 minutes. And if you're wondering what the cookbook this is part of, this is a church cookbook from a church that the majority of my family members are part of, and I don't know that it's available outside of having a contact there. Okay, here comes our cherry pie, straight out of the oven. And if you tried to cut this open right now, it would very much be juicy and gooey and run all over. But once this cools, that will set up, and you can see because I added extra cherries, I bubbled my pie filling out over the edge of my crust there, but that is just fine. It's going to be delicious. And that is our cherry pie. Hopefully, if you guys want to try it with, like I said, I've done this with other fruits as well. It's a delicious pie recipe, and inspire you to make some fresh fruit pies yourself. And thanks to Great Aunt Catherine for her recipe. Thanks for spending your valuable time with us.
I hope you learned something interesting and useful.
Or found something beautiful here.